Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Albers, and welcome to This Week in Anderson on Dingo and the Coach. I am Dingo, and this is the coach, Steve Ellis, my co-host here. And Steve, very excited to have our next guest, guy that's an unbelievable athlete at Anderson High School. Soccer, played football. I mean, he played basketball. He did it all, and it's great to catch up with him. Brent was just a great, not only a player but a great guy overall.
Oh, you ask anybody, what kind of a player he was, what kind of person he was. I'm sure what kind of a student he was. He did everything. I mean, wait till we talk about his accomplishments. And I mean, every sport that he played. I mean, I think the only one he didn't play was tennis, and I'm sure he would have, been an all city at that as well.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it was fun for both of us, obviously, but he played with Timmy, graduated with Timmy,
Yeah.
my brother, and
Yep.
I got to be firsthand of watching those basketball games, and it was
That's
awesome to
right.
watch, him and Dorco and all those guys battle. But so it was kind of cool. So
Yeah.
excited to be joining us as Brent. Brent, thanks for joining us here tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's go back and let's start off away from the beginning. So talk about growing up in Anderson. Talk about what side of Anderson you lived on, and just talk about what it was like growing up, coming up through Anderson.
So yeah, it was great growing up in Anderson. I moved there, I believe, when I was 3 years old. I lived on the east side of town and grew up in Watch Hill and really started playing sports when I was four, playing soccer, and shortly thereafter basketball and baseball and tennis and golf, and really grew up. And we the Rosser family loves sports. I mean,
Yeah.
my older sister was a great athlete. My younger sister was a great athlete. That
Yep.
was just part of kind of who we were growing up in Anderson. And I happened to live down the street from some of my best friends, Dustin and Alex Dooman, who I still keep in close contact with. They were athletes as well.
Yeah.
And then right across Bernie was the Divines, and I grew up with them as well. And they're still some of my best friends. So sports was a part of our life growing up in Anderson. And it was a good place to grow up, and if you like sports. I mean, the programs, not only the youth programs, but the high school programs as well, middle school. I mean, we really had a great opportunity at Anderson to excel in sports if that's what you wanted to do. So it was great. My youth was a lot of times just kind of growing up, but we were at games every weekend during the week. Like I said, my older sister, Angie Rosser, was a great athlete. So a lot of my youth was going around watching her games and swim meets
Yeah.
and getting exposed to that. So it was, like I said, it was part of our makeup to talk about sports, to play sports, and it was part of our lives throughout our time at Anderson.
What was the difference in the ages again of your sisters?
Yeah.
So Angie was 3 years older than me. So she, at least at Anderson, she was a senior when I was a freshman.
Yeah.
And then my little sister Kim was actually 8 years younger than I was, and 11 years younger than Angie. So there was a big gap there. So poor Kim had to go to every football, basketball, baseball, swimming meet you can imagine. So
So, did you end up going to living in Watch Hill? Did you go to Maddox?
I went to Maddox.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to Maddox along with Matt Pierce and the Dumans and the Divines and a number of other great people. I believe Trevor Ellison went there as well.
Yeah.
And we had great teachers, great upbringing at Maddox. I think that's Fox Chapel, is that right?
Yeah.
Where Maddox is. So
Yep. Yep.
that's a great school, right in our neighborhood. And yeah, so we went to Maddox.
I was just there today, and if you can remember pulling into Maddox, that long driveway, and you got the baseball fields and soccer fields off to the left, and that big open field. Well, a couple years ago, when they passed the levee, that whole open field now is gone. It's a parking lot now.
Oh wow. Okay.
It's totally different because I can remember even when I played or when my daughters played, I got older, we would pull in there and there's no parking. You had like pull up in the grass or whatever. But now it's all parking now. It's kind of wild to see.
Yeah, I probably did a lot of recess soccer games on those fields before that
Uh-huh.
parking lot went in.
That's right.
So,
So when you started playing sports, and you mentioned some of the buddies you played with, what were the sports that you started out with? Was it soccer that you started playing?
it was probably soccer and baseball were my
Okay.
first sports, and then probably a couple years later it was basketball. My dad played college basketball at Ohio Wesleyan.
Okay.
So, and he was, he loved sports, and
Yeah. Yes, he
y'all
did.
knew him. And
Yep.
a lot of times growing up, he would be my coach along with another parent.
Yeah.
But I did start out with soccer. We were the Stars, and um, we had a good team. I mean, we had a lot of good players on that team and very supportive parents, which is huge at
That's
that
a
age.
yeah.
And we definitely had that growing up. And of course, as I got older, moved into select teams in Cincinnati, and then ultimately my last travel team, I think they call it now, was Club Ohio in
Hmm.
Columbus, and that was basically a team of folks from Columbus, Dayton, and Cincinnati who joined together for a team, and we would have practices in Columbus during the week. So my mom would drive me and a few of my teammates up there every Wednesday, 4 hours round trip
Yep.
to have practice on Wednesday nights. And this was, during school. So it wasn't like it was
Holy
summer.
cow.
So
Yeah.
that was a huge commitment on her part to do that. But that was my last club team. And that would have been probably ages 14 to 17.
Okay. All right. Now, were you in the era of the as far as middle school goes? Were you at the high school for that whole time?
I was not at the high school. Actually, I was at the high school. I was thinking Mercer, but that was Turpin. So I was at the high school during middle school. So we were kind of thrown in there with a bunch of seniors and juniors and
Yeah.
upperclassmen.
Yeah.
That's right.
That whole era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you were there for 7 through 12, basically.
exactly. 7 through 12.
Wow.
That's right.
So when you got there, besides the intimidation of these 18-year-olds running around the school, what sports did you play, or did you start off with at Anderson? Were you on the football team or the basketball team?
Yeah, I played basketball middle school. Jim Bell was my coach
Wow.
in
Okay.
middle school. And Bartholomew, Mr. Bartholomew, I believe
Yeah, I
coached
see.
that team as well at the time.
Okay.
And then I also ran cross country, and that was during the fall, I believe.
Yeah.
So I did not play football during middle school. I only started football my junior year of high school when they needed a kicker.
Yeah.
That
We're
blows me
gonna
away.
get into that.
We're going to get into that a little bit later. That whole
Okay.
thing blows me away, and I got to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, all right. Well, so let's get into high school, and let's talk about basketball. And you had a really good career at Anderson. I remember following you closely, and uh, you were one of the first players to play for Frank Brandy, who's now the all-time winningest coach in Anderson history. So you're
Yeah.
one of the first players. So talk a little bit about playing at Anderson, because I'm sure you were watching them. You and your dad would go up there and watch the games, but once you got up there and playing for Frank.
It was great. I mean, I played JV my freshman year, I believe, but
Mhm.
then my sophomore year, uh, I was, part of the varsity team and played for Frank. And Frank was and probably still is a great coach. He was big on fundamentals. I remember. I think he played at Anderson as well, if I have that
Yeah.
right, and
Yeah.
was a great player. And I was point guard slash two guard in
Yep.
high school, but I was a shooter. And Frank always, even if I had a rough game, he always said, just keep shooting.
Yeah.
And that was, part of his approach to, be positive and encouraging and really kind of helped me develop as a basketball player. We, you know, we had, some good games. We had some not so good games during that tenure. And I know since I've graduated, they've had a lot of good teams. And I think Frank's, probably a big part of that in terms of developing that program. But when I started, Rich Lohheide was an assistant.
Yeah.
And I think Mr. Bartholomew had moved up to the varsity coach as well to help Frank out.
Yep.
And we were all kind of new to this. I mean, it was, varsity basketball, and Frank was, certainly excited to be there, but I think we were all kind of learning at the same time. And I'll remember, some of those games at Anderson, some of those games at McNick, some of those games at Turpin were, great games and a lot of fun to be a part of. And, as a sophomore, being able to kind of start and play a lot of basketball, and we had some really good players on those teams. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah.
Hey, I got one real quick thing. Were you part of the one when Frank got his first win and he passed out in the locker room at Norwood? Were you part of that? I don't know, Steve, was that around that same time or not? Do you remember? He got his I think Frank got his first win at Norwood.
Yep.
And I remember he went down because he was so excited, and Frank went down in the locker room. I think
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Do you recall that, Brent?
I don't recall that specifically. I remember hearing about that, so that might have been a year before I joined the varsity team.
Okay.
But yeah, he was very intense. He cared a lot about that program, and he's one of those guys that wore his emotions on his sleeve, and he was really cared about that program, and he wanted to win every game for sure.
Yeah,
that's true.
They've done really well. He stepped away for like 7 years.
Okay.
While his son was coming through.
Yeah.
And then he got back got the job again. And this past year, they won the league, and it's only like the second time in 30 years they've won the league.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
that is great.
Yeah,
that is
great.
And
they made it far in the tournament too.
Yeah,
pretty cool. So who were some of if you could remember, who were some of the guys that you played with in basketball?
Oh, well, Tim, obviously, Albers, great player. David Dickey. Yeah. Yeah. David Dickey played with Trevor Ellison, played with, I believe Joe Warner played a couple years as well.
Was Rick Rushing?
Rick Rushing was there. Antoine was there.
Oh yeah.
I think he joined his junior year.
Yeah,
and played a little bit. And then was it Adam Williams, who was our big guy for a couple years there. So we had a lot of talent. Tim was a great player, who was my class. So we kind of grew up in that the same time together, and always enjoyed playing together. I knew that if Tim was open in the inside to get him the ball, he'd usually score.
Yeah. I loved watching you guys play. I mean, and especially when it was you and Timmy and Dorco, and just some of those games you guys had against Woodward were awesome. I mean, I think you might have had a game against Woodward. I think Frank told me that you had a game where you went into overtime. You lost, but I think you had 30, and he said you were just on fire. Said everything you were throwing in, you were putting in, and he thought it was against Woodward. And I said maybe it was the Damon Flint time or something.
Yeah,
he thought it might have been.
Yeah, Woodward. That game that's probably one of my most memorable basketball games that I had at Anderson, because I think Woodward at the time was number 1 or 2 in the city.
Yep.
And they did have Damon Flynn, I believe, at the time. And then they had a younger guy who ended up going to Louisville well, who could just jump out.
Peak, wasn't it?
Yeah, it would jump out of the gym.
Yeah.
And I mean, that place was rocking, because we were not ranked in the city, but we played probably our best game, and we came close, and it did go into overtime. And I think that was probably one of my best games of my basketball career at Anderson. Just
Nice.
I was that was a lot of fun.
Well,
Awesome.
Brent, you popped in 30 for one game. I didn't have 30 for my career, so that's pretty.
There he goes bragging again. There he goes bragging.
That's right.
That's because I had a guy that was the point guard that wouldn't pass me the ball when I got in. So that was
That's
the problem.
right.
He wouldn't
I
pass me
know
the
who
ball.
passed to. Yeah.
So let's obviously basketball was awesome to watch, but soccer was just unbelievable to watch you play in soccer. I believe you were all state, you were all city. I mean, you were all everything. And soccer at Anderson back in the day was, I mean, not that football started, to sway a little bit more, but soccer was always big at Anderson. Talk a little bit about just that experience of playing soccer and who your coach was, and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the coach was Brian Sullivan, and I again played JV my senior or freshman year, and then was moved up for the tournament my freshman year. But then we all kind of moved up to varsity in my class that sophomore year, and we had a great tradition at Anderson for soccer. I mean, it was even before my time, there were a lot of good players, and I joined when as a sophomore when Kevin Schertzer, Greg Lobring, Craig Yaks, and, Alex Duman, all those really good players, and we were typically ranked nationally in the country. Never won the state championship, but we were always ranked tops in the state and ranked nationally in the top 25. My class, it was mentioned Dorco already, but obviously Dustin Duman, Logan Phillips, Andrew Perzigian, and Ashley Dorna. So we had a lot of really, and I'm missing a lot of people. But we had a lot of good players on that team as well, and that was our sophomore year. So we were together for 3 years through our senior year. And we won a lot of games. And our rivals were obviously Turpin and St. X, but we would play teams like Centerville and Dayton Wayne, and those were always good games. And we were very competitive throughout the state, and again, typically ranked nationally.
But I'm playing for Sully. He's our age, and back then, I'm sure he was relatively young coach still. But I mean, he took the program to a whole different level, and obviously having the talent helps. But talk a little bit about playing for Sully, because back then, just from the stands, I could see how intense he was, and I'm sure he was probably pretty fun to play for.
Yeah, Coach Sullivan was a great coach. He was a lot of fun to play for. I had a lot of coaches kind of growing up through select and just youth soccer, and Coach Sullivan was one of the ones that kind of just let you play. And he would put you in a position to be successful. So he really kind of focused on, what are the players' strengths and how do I best take advantage of those. I mean, I was a midfielder in high school in the middle, but he knew where to put our fastest guys. He knew where to put our strong defenders like Dorco, and he had played in high school as well, and kind of that was something that I think came through in his coaching. And it meant a lot to him. He was like it did Coach Brandy. I mean, this was very serious business for him. And he ran great practices. But when it came to game time, he was, he just kind of lets you play. And if there were major issues, we'd address them at halftime. But he cultivated the talent that he was brought, and I think did a great job. I know even after I left, he continued to do a great job.
Yeah.
And he deserves a lot of credit for building up that program and making it kind of relevant throughout, not of course the city, but also the state.
Yeah. Well, like Frank, I mean, Brian is the all-time winningest coach in boys soccer history for Anderson.
Yeah.
And Danny and I still keep in touch with him a whole lot. And in fact, I talked to him today, and he told me to tell you hello. And
Oh,
he was
good.
just telling me, what a great player you were and fun to coach. And he was telling me some of the stories. And correct me if I'm wrong here. That your senior year, you scored 34 goals.
Yeah, I think it was, and I'm trying to remember. I think I had 25 goals, but I had a lot of assists too. I think I had 18 assists
Oh
or
my
something like
gosh.
that.
I
So
mean, it's incredible. It's
so
incredible.
I had a great career, but I it, I think my senior year was at least in soccer was my best.
Yeah.
And I give all the credit to my teammates and coaches. I mean, I had a great team and great support.
Well, what was your record your senior year? Do you remember?
I don't, but I don't think we lost more than 5 games.
Oh no, absolutely. You're right.
Yeah, so it
So
was a great season. Um, a lot of I know I think we took care of Turpin twice, which was nice, and
yes.
beat Centerville that year and St. X as well, I believe.
Yeah.
So you like to win those rivalry games.
Oh
But I
yeah.
think we were pretty dominant that year as well as some other years. Unfortunately, didn't get it done in the tournament, but
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun
Well,
that senior year.
a lot of people, Brent, I know you know this, is they would be ecstatic to just make all league. And your senior year, not only were you all league, you were all city, all
State.
Southwest, all state, and all American, and player of the year in the Inquirer. Am I right on all that?
That's right.
Holy cow!
I mean, that's amazing. I
What
mean,
an accomplishment!
Thank
that is.
you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Well,
no, it was a great honor to that year to have all those accolades. I was surprised by all that stuff, but it was
Well,
nice.
the stats don't lie, as they say.
That's
that's right. Hey, and then to top it all off, I don't know how it happened, but you became the kicker at Anderson High School football.
Yeah, I want to hear
You
this.
just said that you didn't play football up until your junior year. So here's a couple things. Like
Yeah.
the first thing I thought of when, because obviously Timmy played football too, is I thought, holy shit, Brent, if he has to go for a tackle on a breakaway, I want to see this. I want to see.
Well,
And I don't remember any of that, but just talk about, like, did Soriano come to you and ask you, or did you approach him? How did that all work out?
and did Sully approve?
Yeah, good question. I think Rich Newman came to me at first, and it may have been in his office or after soccer practice one day, and asked me if I'd be interested in kicking, or at least trying out to kick. And I maybe thought about it for a day at most, and I said, absolutely, let's try it and see what happens. And I think they talked to Andy Dorco as well that junior year. And so one day, I think after soccer practice, Andy and I just kind of walked down to the football field, and Coach Suriano was down there, and I believe it was Adam Zabo was down there as well. And he was, we just started kicking, and I think we started with extra points, and then we kind of moved back, and Andy and I were both making them. It's not that huge of an adjustment from kicking a soccer ball. So once understand how to contact the ball and swing your leg and plant your foot, it was not overly difficult transition for me or Andy. So after that run through, I think Coach Siriano made the decision that he was going to bring both Andy and I along to kick. And I think Andy stayed on for his junior year, but then decided not to kick the senior year. but I stayed and kicked both junior and senior year.
All right, but
Wow.
you're saying that it was easy. That was without pads. So
Yeah.
someone have to like say, okay, this is where this pad goes, where this pad goes. So was that kind of an adjustment to put the pads on for the first time on the helmet and then do that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was an adjustment. And in fact, I think they wrote a Cincinnati Enquirer article about that, how I didn't know how to put on the pads, the football pads.
Oh
So
no.
I think Coach Sirianni mentioned that in one of his interviews, but yeah, that's right. I was in the locker room before probably a practice, and there were all kinds of pads, and I had no clue how to put them on. And had to ask I think it was Eric Seibert at the time, or Joe Warner was helping me put on the pads and the helmet as well. And I don't know if y'all know this, but when I was kicking for the football team, uh, I one of the guys, and I think it was Eric Seibert, deemed me shiny helmet because I never got tackled. I was never involved in the play.
No
I
marks.
was my helmet was always so shiny, so it was always shiny helmet.
Oh,
That's funny. Well, hey, so but you had an unbelievable career. I think at the time, I haven't looked at the records to see if you still are, but at the time, I think you were the career kick scoring leader at Anderson for
One-
football too, as well. Don't know if that's still true. Obviously, Anderson scores a ton
Yeah.
now, so I don't know if that's the case. But so you had a great. I think you were all city and all league and all that in football too. That's another great accomplishment for you and says a lot to you. But the thing is, I want to know, did you ever make a tackle?
I did. I had two tackles
Oof.
in my career. The first one is much better than the second, but the first one was against Taft, and they had some very speedy guys
Yeah.
running kickoffs back, and I was told by the special teams coach, I think it was Jeff Geesting at the time,
Yeah.
and Coach Sirianni, instead of kicking the ball as far as I could, to squib kick it down the field. So I did that, and this Taft player, we were at home, this Taft player breaks through, and it's just me and him. And he cuts one way, and I kind of go with him, but I think he's going to cut back the other way. And I just grab him, and I just hold on for dear life. Right?
Hey, you know what, Brett? I tell you what, I've got a lot of the game film still from back
Yeah.
in the day. I'm gonna have to try to find that one, and what I'll do is I'll cut it up and I'll send it to
That's
you.
funny.
Yeah, and I remember because they televised those games, and they had commentators. And Steve, was it you or one of your brothers?
It's one of my
Right,
brothers.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it was your brother who was doing the game,
Yeah.
and he saw the tackle and got pretty excited about it, and
Of course he did.
and I think his comment was, I wonder what Frank Brandy and Coach Sullivan think about that play.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Hey, trust me, Frank wasn't at the football games just to cheer him on. He was making sure you were okay.
That's right. Yeah, they never told me explicitly I couldn't tackle anyone, but it was kind of a joke and maybe an unspoken rule that I should stay away
Yes.
for if there was a bad snap or something, I should just
Kind
get
of
away.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
funny.
the one thing, Danny, is it's pretty. I mean, it's almost a trivia question. In all seriousness, is that how many athletes? I don't care. You want to say Ohio or across the country make all city in two sports that are in the same season.
That's a great point. That is
I mean, honestly,
is true.
in Anderson history, it probably will never happen again.
I don't know if too many people that have it. You can honestly
Think about it.
mean, the only way it would
Please.
be is like you said, is if they played soccer and kicked, for
Yeah.
football.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know what other sports. I mean, unless they're like all city cross country and or something. But I mean, it's beyond rare. Let's say that.
No,
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty incredible just looking at your stats. And I thought you only played your senior. I forgot that you played both junior and senior year, and I was looking at that, and I was like, my goodness. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is
Yeah.
very impressive, Brent. I mean,
There, there's another interesting story about kicking is I was good friends with Rebecca Breach, Jim Breach's daughter,
Oh,
who kicked for the Bengals.
okay.
And as we were leading up to the season, Jim Breach came down to Anderson and gave me an hour lesson of how to kick the football.
really,
Nice.
So yeah,
that's pretty
That's
cool.
I don't know if
that's
y'all
really
knew
cool.
that, but that
I
was
didn't.
that Jim Breach came down and helped me a lot.
That.
But yeah, that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Wow.
That's
So
awesome.
so in the so we talk about basketball and obviously soccer. So in the spring, were you taking time off, or did you play basketball or run track or baseball or run track, or was there anything else that you could do?
Not during my junior and senior years. I think I played baseball my freshman and sophomore year, but
Okay.
really by my junior and senior years, I was playing so much soccer that it was difficult for me to do both
Yeah.
because of that travel team and
Yep.
just being out of town a lot. So that was during those spring baseball seasons I was playing soccer.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's talk a little bit like after high school and all that. So obviously you're a good, soccer player, basketball player. And now you're kicking for football. Was there a lot? What was the thought of college? Were you going to play any one of those sports, and what was the recruiting like for you for that?
So I'd gotten interest in all three of those sports: basketball, football, and soccer. Varying levels of interest. I think for basketball, it was largely D3 schools. For football, I think I may have gotten some attention from some Division 1 schools. And then soccer, it was mostly Division 1 schools
Okay.
who were interested. And for soccer, it was kind of some of the, what I would consider at the time to be some of the good programs throughout the country in
Yeah.
soccer and and so I was thinking about really never thought about kicking in college, but I was thinking about playing basketball and soccer. But that would have been probably had to be at a D3 school. My ultimate decision was to just stick with soccer. It would probably gave me the most opportunities in terms of schools
Right.
and playing continue to play kind of the top level competition.
Yeah.
So
Where'd you end up?
where'd you end up going?
I went to Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. They small school, but played Division 1 soccer and had a good tradition of playing competitively at that level. And again, we played 4 years there. Unfortunately, broke my leg my junior year, but did come back and play my senior year.
Oh wow.
And we had some really good teams as well during that time, and that was a lot of fun.
What was the schedule like? I mean, like what teams did you play?
So we played in the Southern Conference, so that would include teams like Davidson, App State,
Mhm.
Citadel, UNC Greensboro. But then we would also play out of conference, and that would include Clemson, Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, and we'd play teams throughout the country, including, Cal Berkeley.
Oh wow.
So we would play, pretty high level Division 1 teams at Furman, even though it was a smaller school.
Didn't
Yeah.
PJ Schiano go to Furman?
I think he did. Yeah, I think he did.
Was he around the same time you were then? Do you know? Do you remember?
He would have been, I think, 3 years after me.
Oh, was he? Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought he did. I couldn't
yeah.
remember that.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask about your family and what you're doing now, Brent. But first and foremost, I want to talk about your dad, Chip, who's a legend in his time here and gone way too soon, unfortunately. And he meant a lot to a lot of people, and he
Absolutely.
mentored and coached a lot of people. And talk a little bit about your dad and your family, if you're married and kids and your sisters as well.
Sure. So, yeah, my dad passed away in 2001. He was 54 at the time, and as you all know, he was committed to Anderson in that community. And I consider him a pillar in that community,
No question.
frankly. And I think he served on the board of education there, and just I think made a lot of really strong contributions to that community, and including Anderson, both in sports and academically as well. But one thing I'll say about my dad and my mom, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, is the amount of support that they gave to me and my sisters growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, they were at every game.
Yeah.
And a lot of times practices.
Yeah.
Right.
And that means so much as a son and as my sister, as daughters, to see that kind of support.
Right.
Yep.
And that continued throughout my college career as well. They would fly down regularly to see games in Greenville, games in Winston-Salem and Chapel Hill, and fly back the next day or even that night. So they were, and that extended to my grandparents as well, who were in town, my mom's parents, and they would come to a lot of games. But my dad was a huge influence on me growing up. We would talk high school sports all the time in the kitchen until late at night. And my mom would tell us both to have to go to bed. He was a huge influence on my life. And, as you talked about, things after sports, he was a lawyer, and I ended up going to law school after college at Case Western in Cleveland, Ohio, and did that for 3 years, and then eventually got a job with a law firm in Charlotte and started here in 2001 as a summer clerk, and then permanently in 2002 as an associate. And I've been with the same law firm in Charlotte since. And now I'm married to Morgan Rosser. She's from Gulf Breeze, Florida, went to Auburn University. We met here in Charlotte. And then we have 2 little girls, Alan Ann and Amelia. Alan Ann's 11 and Amelia's 9. Awesome. And we're all doing great. They all are close with my mom, their grandmother, who's in Georgia now. And then my sister's Kim is married to a great guy who she met at University of Georgia, Billy Crosby. Her name's Kim Crosby now. And then Angie is doing great in West Virginia. She is an executive director of the Waterkeeper Association there, and doing great things with that. And we see each other probably less often than we like, but when we do see each other, it's always great. And a lot of times we talk about Anderson High School, so it's a lot of fun to get together. And my mom's doing great. She's married to Bob Lang, and they live on a lake in Georgia, on Lake Oconee there. And that's only 3.5 hours away. So we get to see them quite a bit. So it's, the Rosser family is doing great, and we certainly miss our dad, but no, he left a lasting impact on, of course, our family, but also that community there in Anderson. And
absolutely.
It's so nice to hear people like you remember him and kind of think about him in terms of the positives that he brought to that high school and the community.
Absolutely. He was one of a kind. I think we were all, I could probably speak for Steve too, that fortunate enough that our dads were a huge part of our lives sports wise. I know my dad was too. And I distinctly remember after games, Bob Dorco and my dad in that garage going over plays and talking about how they're going to get Brent the ball, and and how they're what they got to do, and Timmy and Adam got a rebound, and so it's It's just your dad was just an unbelievable guy, and I know that his legacy. He's got a lasting impression here in Anderson Township. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. So, what about guys? We talked briefly about that. You said with a couple guys in high school, you still keep in touch with them.
Yeah, absolutely. The Divines, Mark and Brian, and really the whole Divine family, Alex and Dustin Duman and his whole family, the Pierces, Matt Pierce, I keep in touch with a lot. And I know he married Jamie, they still live in the area. Logan Phillips, I don't know if you remember Logan, but Logan was a great guy who I keep in touch with as well. So I've still got a lot of great connections there. And I hear from folks at Anderson from time to time, including Eric Sexton, Jake Andriadis, Greg Kerball, Andy Dorco, Trevor Ellison, and Joe Warner. All those, we were lucky to have such a great group at that time. And it's amazing that I met some of those guys 40 years ago, 42 years ago, and we're still very close in terms of our friendship and keeping up with each other's families. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's nice to continue those relationships.
Yeah.
Well, they're gonna love watching this, Brent, because a lot of people that haven't seen or talked to you, other than the buddies you talked about, that they're gonna be happy to see this.
Great.
Yeah, they definitely will. So we're going to go ahead and try to wrap this up real quick, and we're going to do it like we always do: is try to give us some of your favorite memories, favorite high school memory, maybe college, and then maybe either a favorite teacher or coach. So let's start off with the high school. You might have mentioned it, but is that still the one, the basketball with Woodward game?
Yeah, I think in terms of basketball, that was probably one of the best games that I've been a part of. It was, we were the underdog. It was David versus Goliath, and we were David, and we almost did it. But Coach Brandy was so proud of the team, and we were so proud of each other for giving it our best and came up short, but our heads were held high on that. In terms of coaches, it's hard to narrow down coaches. I mean, Coach Sullivan was fantastic. Suriano and Brandy were all fantastic. But, in terms of a connection, Rich Lohheide was, involved in my kind of athletic career at Anderson. Him and, Rich Newman were both involved in my career, regardless of the sport. They were kind of with me all the way through. And that was despite, Rich Lohheide's battle with cancer and all that he was going through. So it's hard for me to narrow down teachers and coaches, but, the support that I had from all my coaches, including the administration, was huge. And, I was very lucky to have that kind of support throughout my career in all sports.
Well, you had 3 Hall of Fame coaches, right? 3 guys that are in the Hall of Fame at Anderson High School. Soriano,
exactly. It was an amazing run of coaches there, and I know they had some mentees under them, and I know their influence on Anderson still remains, I'm sure.
Yeah. So you've got to have a college one where tell me there's one where you scored a goal and you went sliding down on your knees and you lifted up your shirt or something. There's got to be one from So give me a college one.
Yeah. So college one was probably my freshman year against Clemson. They were number 2 in the country, and I was just a freshman. And at the time, I was not starting. I was coming off the bench, but I was in the game, and I was playing forward at the time. I was a striker, and we had 2 guys up front, and my teammate at the time, he was a guy from Texas. He was just 1 year older than me, but he had got the ball down near the sideline, and We were not ranked at the time, so this is a huge game. Huge crowd was there, and my teammate crossed the ball, and I was battling with a guy who'd been an All-American at Clemson on the national team, I believe, and
Wow.
was able to beat him to the ball and score the goal. And when I scored the goal, I didn't even see the ball go in the goal. I was on the ground.
Oh,
But I just got my leg on it and was able to get it in somehow.
nice.
And the only reason I knew it went in is I heard the crowd cheering and my teammates coming up to hug me, and we ended up winning that game. And that was, I think ended up 2-1, but obviously that goal was a huge
Awesome.
thing for my career at Furman, and to have it happen at home, and it's such a big game against such a good team was probably my best, memory in terms of Furman soccer.
Wow. That's a pretty good
That's
memory.
awesome.
Yeah.
Man, I was
Yeah.
hoping you were going to give me one of those sliding it down, taking it off, spinning it around. Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear.
Not
That's
right. No.
That's pretty awesome. Well, Brent, we really appreciate it. I know you're very busy, and we really, really appreciate taking the time. And it was just great for us to catch up with you. It's been long overdue. We've been wanting to do this for a long time, and it's really great to catch up with you. And I'm glad that your family's doing well. And hopefully, if you do make it back in town for that draft or whatever, you can get a hold of us and we can get a beer. Maybe I can get Dorco and Timmy and some of your old teammates.
That's
together.
right. I would love that. That would be great. Dan and Steve, thank you so much for having me on, and tell everybody I said hey.
We
Awesome.
definitely will. So Brent,
Yep.
we go ahead and wrap it up here. So thanks again. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. So for Steve Ellis, Dan Albers, and Brent Rosser, you've been listening to This Week in Anderson on Dingo and the Coach. We'll catch you next week.